Is this? Oh, okay. Yeah, I think for us, for Kimberly-Clark, this is about the opportunity to show some leadership. In June, we announced our 5-year sustainability initiative called Sustainability 2015. And as part of that, we've set a goal, one of many goals, to achieve 25% of our net sales from what we're calling environmentally innovative products by the year 2015. One of the things we're looking at within that is greenhouse gas emissions reductions around our products. Without a standard like this, we don't really have a credible way to talk about greenhouse gas emissions in our products. So it's particularly important to give us both that confidence internally as we look at making improvements, say in the product development arena, as well as we start thinking about how we communicate externally with folks about the improvements that we're making. We need a broadly accepted international standard like this to underpin that calculation and that process.
Thank you. Sam?
Hi. Sorry for my accent. I'm from Hong Kong. I'm representing a company called Swire. It is a conglomerate. This time we use the beverages industry, the beverages business, that we use the Coca-Cola product to test the product carbon footprinting. It helps us to clear some of the misunderstandings. First is that the carbon dioxide in the carbonated drinks, they are not counted in the calculation because it is a byproduct from other process. And another is that in the past, we focus more on the production side, and we look at Scope 1 and Scope 2. And after the study, we found out that the major chunk of emission from the life cycle assessment is from the packages, amount to like 47%. And then the second one is from the sales and marketing, the cooling machine, the energy used from the cooling machine. It accounts for like 20%. And then delivery, 10%. And the fourth comes with the production. So it helps us to align the strategy of our way of handling the whole carbon emission. And now it also helps us to address to our consumer the carbon footprint of the product they are consuming, first on the product, and then the cooling side and delivery. And it helps us to, make it quick, clear one of the misunderstandings is that most people think that returnable glass bottle is more environmental friendly. But after our study, they found out that it is more energy intensive than one-way plastic or aluminum can products.
Well, and why is that? What makes the difference?
Because of the weight. Glass bottle weight to the package to the product ratio is like 1:1. And even if you can reuse it for 30 times, it's 1:30. But plastic to like product is 1:50. And it is the packaging side, but the delivery, it is very heavy for delivery of glass product. And glass, you have to put it into a crate, and it adds the weight and also the volume.
Sure. And has that actually changed what you've been doing in your business as a result of that discovery?
It helps us to rethink about, what products that we should develop and what packages we want to use. And one of the area we are developing is the closed loop plastic bottle. In China, we're working with a contractor that can take back the used plastic bottle and put it back into one of the main ingredients of producing new bottles. So now in China, we are using 10% recycled materials.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Many of you are familiar with Ford, obviously a large global company, and so we road tested the Scope 3 standard, and we really wanted to build on our successes in our Scope 1 and Scope 2, our facilities management that's been handled by my colleagues in our environmental quality office. And Ford is a strategy of engaging with its suppliers on sustainability. I'm part of a small organization within our global purchasing organization, supply chain sustainability. We take Ford's corporate sustainability strategy and engage the supply chain and really push it down and cascade it into the supply chain. The supply chain is very complex in automotive. It's both broad and deep. It spans many different industries. We have more than 1,600 Tier 1 production suppliers, more than 9,000 non-production suppliers. There's more than 130,000 different parts under production at any one time, and we spend about $65 billion a year through our supply chain. So understanding our footprint and our Scope 3 emissions is a very important part of that, although we know that on a life cycle basis, our use phase emissions are the biggest component of our overall emissions. Nonetheless, in order to understand how we can impact our use phase emissions and reduce our use phase emissions over time, we have to be able to look at our product, our processes, and our operations. And this was an opportunity to understand the full value chain of our operations.
Again, an interesting fact about, as you say, the use phase being that the largest proportion. What proportion are they actually of the total life cycle?
Depending on that, it's between 80 to 90%.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So really, yeah.
So it's a large part.
Right. Thank you. Your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. So we're an electricity producer in New Jersey, and we're, as one of the country's largest electricity producers, we felt it was important to transparently communicate to our stakeholders the full life cycle greenhouse gas impacts of our products, the electricity that we deliver to customers. And so we wanted to understand the opportunities and risks that our value chain could present to us in the context of helping to benchmark ourselves against competitors and operating in competitive electricity markets. It's important to understand what risks we may face if or when a carbon regime is passed in the U.S. So that was the primary driver, to transparently communicate to stakeholders and recognizing that we're in an industry that is responsible for a large percentage of the U.S. emissions.
And again, do you think it's kind of, as you've started to think about this, has it changed anything you've been doing?
Well, to be honest, on the Scope 3 side, it helped us it provided some clarity around our biggest sources of upstream emissions, particularly with fossil fuel procurement. Shale gas, we've heard a lot about. There's a lot of debate right now around life cycle impacts of shale gas development, as well as coal mining. So it was a big moment when we realized the scope or scale of emissions in fossil fuel extraction and production, and how that compares to the use of the fuel when we're burning it for electricity. So that was a big aha moment. But to your point, has it done anything to our business? Absent a carbon regime and a price on carbon, there's not much we can do right now to mitigate those emissions.
Yeah, sure. And sorry, when you say there was a big aha moment, what was the revelation there?
Well, I mean, our upstream emissions, fossil fuels, are about half as much of our direct Scope 1 emissions, and so that was a huge source of emissions that we can anticipate potentially some supply chain risk if greenhouse gases are to be regulated at the extraction and production level, which currently is not envisioned in the proposals that Congress was considering a year or two ago, but is nevertheless part of our value chain that we're watching and seeing how regulation would evolve to address those emissions.
In terms of the, I mean, I want to talk a bit more broadly about data in a bit, but just in terms of that specific issue, as you say, about thinking about shale gas production, it's been, of course, very, very controversial. Exactly what are the emissions from shale gas production compared to coal production? There's, a very vigorous debate being had on that subject right now. How can you make a call? Do you think you have to make a call on those kind of issues? I mean, given that there doesn't appear to be one kind of settled standard for the numbers you should be using.
Yeah, I think recently a lot of reports have been published. Carnegie Mellon did a good survey of different emissions from different mines, and so the science will settle out, I think, in the next couple of years. What we were able to do was rely on proxy data, industry general data to estimate what those emissions are from upstream emissions. In the case of natural gas, we don't have, it's tough to track gas from the pipe that you receive from where it's coming from. So it was less of a concern from us from which specific wells the gas was coming from, and to identify emissions associated with that specific well, but more of an exercise of understanding generally in the production of gas what the emissions are associated with that. And so, yeah, there's a debate. I think the uncertainty is narrowing, though, in the context of how much upstream emissions are associated with shale gas production, and as well as conventional gas production, which also emits a lot of fugitives. So I think the band of uncertainty is narrowing, and will continue to do so as science and policymakers hone in on that.
Sure, thank you. As I said, thinking about kind of data more generally, I was interested to hear Linda Fisher made some comment in the earlier session about, I guess, data is an issue, and not all companies are at the same point on this, and some are much more advanced than others. I mean, I'm assuming from the fact you're participating here and you're set up here and being prepared to talk about it, that you all think you've gone some distance and you've all thought about this, obviously, and you're all kind of signed up to it. A lot of people hearing about this for the first time are going to throw their hands up in the air and scream in horror, aren't they? I mean, the thing that I was very so this excellent report, which I haven't, I've obviously purchased 148 pages. I've managed to commit it all to memory in the past 5 minutes, so it's I can commit it to you all. But the thing that leapt out at me was when you look on page 31 here, this very nice chart of the what are Scope 3 emissions, and when you just look at that list, so purchase goods and services, capital goods, fuel, transport, distribution, waste generation, business, and then a whole load more, use of the product, end life, investment, franchises, retailing. It's a huge task, isn't it? The collection of all this data, and I wonder if, I mean, interested in hearing your thoughts about how you are facing those challenges and coping with them and kind of making it work. And then the question of whether you think business in general, how many companies will really be prepared to take on this challenge and really think that it's going to be a worthwhile exercise for them, to the extent that this does genuinely become an adopted common standard across industry, certainly across major companies worldwide. David. It's all right. Sorry, I'm picking on you because you're nearest.
No, I think generally, I think Pankaj outlined some important points in what he said earlier, in that there's sort of a twofold solution here. I think the first one is deciding what you think is actually going to be relevant to your business and what's going to be sort of important to track. And then the second thing being, where can we actually get quality data? So trying to find the intersection of those two and start there, right? I think one of the great things about, especially the Scope 3 standard, is that it really allows you to say, okay, these are the things we're going to focus on to start and expand over time. So I think, first of all, companies need to take advantage of that and say, okay, we're going to, where we can get quality data and we think it's important to our business, we're going to start by measuring that. And I think the other thing that was mentioned earlier is the possibility or the option to use what's called secondary data. So to go out and you find sort of a surrogate data source that might be already available, existing studies or data that's been compiled by trade associations or those kinds of things, to say, okay, we're going to use this as a placeholder to start, maybe to do that evaluation to determine whether or not you think it's relevant or a significant important source for your business, and build from there. I think that's an important strategy to keep in mind, certainly for the Scope 3 standard, but for the product standard as well, to start out, sort of do an initial pass, understand where you need to get more information, and go into more detail over time.
And so in terms of the challenge then that it presents to you, and presents to you as a manager and to you as a company, how daunting is it, do you think? I mean, you kind of look at this and you think, actually, this is okay, this is manageable, this is doable, or do you kind of gritting your teeth and taking a deep breath before you approach it?
I think there's a little bit of both. Yeah. I think part of what gives us confidence when we go into this is having some ability to make decisions about where we're going to use this information. So, if we were going to just go out tomorrow and start making all sorts of declarations and commitments around this, maybe we would be pretty uncomfortable with the state of the data and the information that's available. Given that we want to first start looking at this internally, make some internal decisions, inform what we're doing, especially on the product development side, and evolve that over time. and make sure that, especially where we're looking at something like, and one of the things that's emphasized, I think, in the product standard is the ability to use this as a resource for performance tracking over time. So where we can do that and we can ensure that we have sort of consistent data across the comparisons we're making, that's particularly important, so that we can have confidence in the decisions we're making, even if we don't have confidence in all the individual pieces of data that we're using.
Sure. Sam?
Yeah, I think I'd like to share with you, I mean, to my surprise, initially I thought that the most difficult part of data will be from the contractors or maybe from the waste disposal. But the last piece of information that came back to me was the secret formula component from Coca-Cola, and they keep it so secretly that we only have the data, we don't know the component inside. And I think the most important issue is to get the useful information is the relationship with the contractors. And with us, we have a partnership relationship with our suppliers and contractor, and we sort of get the data not that difficult. And especially, I mean, we mentioned in the morning that 2/3 of the company responded to the GHG protocol, Scope 1 and Scope 2, and there are more companies outside the Fortune 500 who are reporting to the GHG protocol. And some of our suppliers and contractors are actually providing their data to the GHG protocol, and they sort of have an understanding of the process. And we found that not very difficult. The difficult part is sometimes we use secondary data, and we may have to do, use the database which are based on the European or American data. But I think we are working on getting some more data from China, especially on the waste disposal side.
And I'm interested in, and again, what did I throw this open to a few people, but also your sense of business opinion in general. When you meet people, whatever, at a party, at a conference, and you kind of talk about what you're doing. And I'm interested, I guess, particularly then from an Asian perspective, you meet other people in Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, wherever. Do you get a sense that people are kind of interested and want to engage with this and think this might be something they'd want to pursue, or again, do people look horrified?
People, well, initially look horrified, but if you think about the situation in China, the production or growth is like double-digit, and if you calculate double-digit in 7 years, you will double your production. And in ourselves, we're looking at in 2020 triple of our production, which means that if we continue our own process, current process, we'll have to use 3 times the material and 3 times the energy and water, which is not sustainable. And it happens to most companies in China. So in China, we have to think a way of producing more material, more product, using less resources. And that's why, I mean, looking at the carbon footprint and whole product carbon life cycle analysis that help us to make product more efficiently and find innovative way of producing more with less.
Jonathan.
I think this is you're witnessing kind of the beginning of an accounting standard, or the intermediate stage of an accounting standard, depending on the scope of the different standards that you're looking at. And from our perspective, one of the things that struck me is that between the types of data, the primary and secondary data, I think Ford really believes that you can't do this correctly without gathering some primary data. You need to be able to do that and work with your suppliers, engage them, raise the awareness over time, increase the quality of the data to be able to inform in a robust manner what the data looks like behind that. It helps us in our risk management, in our supply chain. It helps our suppliers in their risk management. And then ultimately, when you gather all that data, then you can work collaboratively, whether it's a manufacturer and supplier, or whether it's at an industry level as well, because we are also engaging at the industry level. In the next panel, we'll, I think, talk about some of the work that's going on from an industry perspective. But all of those organizations really have to come together and work out solutions to all of these issues to be able to systematically develop solutions that can be low carbon or high efficiency, cost reducing, risk mitigating, whatever the case may be.
And again, that question about kind of your sense of opinion beyond your company. I mean, you know, perhaps across the auto industry, do you get the sense that people want to engage with this? I mean, do you feel that Ford is a leader, and if so, are you kind of way out ahead of everyone else, or just a little bit?
No, I think you know, I like to think Ford is a leader, obviously, but we've been very active in working with our colleagues at the other OEM manufacturers, particularly here in North America, but as well as some of the Asian automotive manufacturers, and also working hand in hand with our selective tier one suppliers on this issue of how to reach out to suppliers, how to standardize some of the at least the data collection aspects of the work. Not so much of all the Scope 3 issues yet, but I think that will come over time.
Right, because again, as you say, if you're doing primary data collection and that's kind of, you know, you're just doing it for yourself, and, you know, then you're asking people to take a lot on trust, right? You say, oh, you know, we found this and this is the answer. It's, yeah. So it needs to be, you need to open it up, you think?
You need to open it up, yes. Yeah, I mean, so much of the automotive supply base is shared.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Mark?
Yeah, I would just agree with everyone. It's a challenge. It requires an engineering and accounting skill set that not many people or professionals have, and so it's challenging. That said, the standard provides a great, excellent framework for first setting a boundary, getting a handle on sources of emissions, and then drilling down. It allows you to use estimation methods and then drill down into data where it's available. And so I feel that the standard provides a great methodology for going about this process step by step, and it makes it bearable in the end. And again, it's a question of what resources you have, and then making decisions as far as where to get more and better data based on relevance and importance to your business. And so,
but bearable in the end. That's a ringing endorsement. And tell me about the again the industry view. When you talk to other people in the energy industry, do you think again there's going to be a kind of a willingness to adopt this? Did you find other people interested in what you're doing?
I think we're one of few companies who have done that, and certainly organizations like CDP have prompted and encouraged more energy companies to start reporting Scope 3. So that's generally the trend. Again, we're focused on Scope 1 emissions in the energy industry, and having policy not moved forward to enact a price on carbon or having some carbon regime. I think that provides an impetus for while slowing down the march forward into the accounting for more life cycle. So I think there's a willingness to account for life cycle emissions, but I think the policy will need to catch up in order to have companies fully embrace it, and then to do actions to actually address emissions from their life cycle.
Sure, thanks. I want to come back to the, sorry, David, you want to go
I was going to say, I think on that question in particular of cross-industry collaboration and sort of support for this approach. I mean, I think you look specifically in our industry, sort of the consumer goods industry, and you've had organizations already step forward, like the Consumer Goods Forum, like the Sustainability Consortium, to say, okay, we endorse this approach, and we're going to adopt this across our membership for the use in what we're doing around sustainability accounting. So I think that is, you're starting to see some of that endorsement and support emerge already across industries.
Yeah, sure. I wonder maybe if we want to take a couple of questions from the floor. Does anyone want to come in? Anyone want to make a point or ask a question? Yeah, we got one there. Thanks for yeah. But there are mics circulating, so if you could wait for a mic before you speak.
Thank you. Rajan with Ecolab. This whole question about data, I'm scratching my head saying, wait a minute, Scope 3, all Scope 3 is someone else's Scope 1 and Scope 2. To the extent that we are trying to shed new light on darkness, is it because for the last 10 years, we as companies have not pushed our supply chain or our customers to get their act together on their Scope 1 and Scope 2? And does this new standard actually give us the carrot or the stick to multiply the Walmart effect and have the Kimberly-Clark effect and the Ford effect and the PSEG effect, both upstream and downstream? I wonder about your thoughts on that.
I mean, I suppose the ultimate implication of what you're saying, the end point would be some sort of huge global database that has absolutely everybody's emissions of all kinds, and then each just individual corporations would kind of plug into it. I suspect we're still a way off that. But would anyone want to pick up on that in terms of the, that there is now movement towards this, and we are, because now we've got the standards, there is going to be a lot more progress than we've had.
I would say easier said than done. Certainly, to the degree that our suppliers are reporting their Scope 1 emissions, that's helpful, but are they reporting it at the product level? Are they reporting it in a way that we understand what is in their numbers, or are they just doing it corporate-wide? And so I think once you drill into the details, it becomes a lot more difficult to isolate sources, specific categories or sources of emissions that you're looking to pull and extract. But generally, I think that is the trend. But we have a long way to go to get there where it's easy and frictionless, I would say.
I think it does. I think it's another driver in large companies or companies that are looking at their Scope 3 emissions as they're reaching out to their customers. Companies respond to their clients, the companies that they do business with, and so that's forcing, in our case, we have a variety of industries, a variety of companies that we work with. Some are big and some are very sophisticated in how they're looking at and measuring and managing these greenhouse gas emissions. Others are private companies, or they may not have had this on the radar screen, or they've been more reluctant to share information outside of their walls. And this is a new driver, kind of like that Walmart effect, like you said, and really pushing that discussion and that disclosure.
And again, I mean, so you use it globally, and Sam, I wonder if you've got views on this, comparing Asia with North America, let's say, that, I mean, is there generally just a better kind of a base of installed data out there because there's been more of a history of it, more companies have been doing more things in terms of collecting data over the past decade, or is that not particularly the case?
It's not particularly the case. I mean, it is starting in China, and but that's right. If all the companies, if they can report on the Scope 1 and Scope 2, that can help the process quite a lot. But that is one issue that we previously touched on is if a company that provides product to different companies, and they may only report on, they may not be able to produce data for one specific product, and that will have an issue. And that is more than the supply chain. The Scope 3 also include the waste handling and disposal. And that part, there's no one Scope 1 and Scope 2, or maybe the government or the scavengers, and it's difficult to get the data.
Right, good point, good point. Anyone else wanting to? There's one at the front here. Okay.
A quick question, I'll talk loudly. As consumers, we are all independent consumers, just like we are businessmen. So often in industry, whether it's miles per gallon, safety rating, Carfax reports, do you have plans to use sustainability metrics in how you approach your next product development? Because this now provides you the framework to do that and maybe establish standards that your consumers are going to value.
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, certainly that's our intent in adopting this standard, is to use it as part of product development to give us the opportunity to, in a credible way, look at how we're making improvements in our products generation to generation. I think there's another related issue there that we haven't figured out how to deal with yet, which is how do we then communicate that information or communicate the findings of that activity to folks externally?
Like labeling process?
Certainly labeling it would be one example, but I think even more generally just in terms of any reporting or any even just conversational communication, what information we really need to provide to make that that statement or that information credible.
I mean, some of you may have seen this, this wind-made idea, this thing which is a badge you can stick on your product to say this product was made using wind power. Which, I mean, there's a whole load of questions actually you could raise about that, about whether that really works and whether things really have been made using wind power. But it's, I mean, that's kind of a step in that direction. I think it's an interesting idea, trying to do something like that. But I mean, in terms of heading in that direction, you're really at a very early stage yet. I mean, just kind of instinctively, do you think that might be a place you'd want to end up, is putting a badge on something and saying this is, this is low carbon, this is high sustainability, whatever you want to say about it?
I hope not. In large part because we haven't seen the sort of consuming public ready to process that information yet. Until we have an audience that can handle the information that we're providing them, it's just noise.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
I mean, in Swire, we are looking at impact neutral that applies to water, energy, and waste. And specifically to the beverages industry, we're looking at like water neutral. And for carbon, we have a goal of growth in business, but not in carbon. That may have an impact, especially in China, if we're going that fast. So we're looking at the intensity target, but in a global target, balancing some in country that produce less and some produce more, we should be able to make the growth in business, but not in carbon. And for the carbon footprinting label, it is what we sort of do not recommend to put it into the product because it is difficult to compare. For example, an classic Coke and Coke Zero, which one does not have the sugar, and obviously the carbon is less, but it is not certainly. I mean, that is the choice of the consumer on the product in terms of the flavor, and more than the carbon footprinting exercise.
And I mean, I don't know if it happens at all over here, but certainly in the UK, you can buy products. You can buy a packet of chips that's got this product, this bag created 3.5 grams of CO2 in its production or whatever it is. But I mean, so people have tried it, but how effective it's been, whether it's actually changed anyone's opinion about anything, I don't know. So, Jonathan.
Well, I was just going to say, I think absolutely sustainability decisions in data enter into the product development that all of my colleagues do. The Scope 3 emissions and all of the work that we do from our supply chain sustainability perspective enters into the product development or the sourcing decisions to varying degrees. In terms of the consumer interface, I think we've seen less appetite for that type of information to date. That may change over time, I don't know, and then becomes the whole question of how do you put that information out there in a way that's meaningful for such a complex product as an automobile or a truck.
And also, given what you've said about the whole life cycle emissions of an automobile or a truck, actually, if you use just fuel efficiency as your metric, that if that gets you kind of 80 to 90% of the way there already, then perhaps some of the other issues are secondary.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mark.
Well, in the case of electricity, the metric is easy. It's pounds of CO2 or tons of CO2 per kilowatt hour. The question is, how do you get consumers to the information is out there. You can look at companies to see what their performance is, but to getting it to consumers, I mean, there's electricity in this room, and where does it come from? And a lot of companies buy renewable energy credits to offset, but consumers have demonstrated very little tolerance for paying higher electricity costs for green attributes. They seem to want greener energy, but when confronted with a decision to pay higher electricity for those greener attributes, they're less likely to do so. So we think that internalizing the costs into the electricity, internalizing it into the market is the best way to do it, and rather than making it more complex for consumers to make a decision that is against their wallet, I guess. And
people do try to use it for consumer branding. Of course, someone tried to sell me green electricity on Broadway only over the weekend.
Did you buy it?
No. Are you telling me it would have been more expensive?
Generally, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I didn't sign up then. But yeah, because I mean, whatever. So they were badging it from wind power. Presumably, it's not going to be entirely from wind power. They must have some kind of fuel mix in there, and how they calculate that.
I mean, it's the renewable energy credits that capture the attributes of the carbon-free kilowatt hours that are produced from that. So there's a way to isolate that and then buy that on the market and then sell it to you as a consumer.
Right.
So,
Okay. I'm with you. But we're not yet at the point where that's competitive with using coal.
It's not competitive economically yet without subsidies, but subsidies are embedded in a lot of our economy right now. So it's tough to tease that out. But yeah, it's just a matter of getting the information to consumers and having them not have to make a decision that's against their economic best interests. Yeah. And we feel that, again, internalizing the price of carbon is the way to do that, because then the externalities, the negative consequences of carbon and other air pollution are embedded in the price of electricity. So that would put wind at a level playing field to coal, for instance.
Yeah, I'm with you. Sure. Thanks. Anyone else wanted to? Yeah, there's one down the back there. Let's just have a look, because we're running a little bit short on time. So sorry, and then you had one. Shall I come to you next? Okay.
Hi, Katie Schindel. Is it on? Yes. Katie Schindel, EMC. I had a question about allocation. I was wondering if, in your experience testing the new standard, you found that it helped to address that constant challenge.
Anyone want to answer that? Allocation, how do you do it?
I can answer that. I guess we took a variety of approaches actually as we reached out to our suppliers this year. We went through an industry questionnaire, an industry developed questionnaire that dictated that they had to report and allocate their emissions on a % financial sales basis. And then we also went through the Carbon Disclosure Project supply chain program and left by design with that questionnaire more open to the companies that were replying to determine what would be the most appropriate or best way to allocate emissions. And we're kind of going through that analysis now to look at that particular issue. Obviously, there's challenges associated with allocating by % financial sales. It's certainly not ideal, but it was a starting point from an industry perspective. Is somewhere to go to begin to get companies thinking about and looking at how they're allocating and these emissions to their customers.
Anyone else? Allocation solutions that you've tried?
I think from our standpoint, one of the things that's come out of our experience working with this standard has been the recognition that we needed to have a standardized procedure internally for what I think, in a technical sense, be called process subdivision for our own data. So we didn't have to do allocation, or we didn't have to deal with some of the inaccuracies that would come with allocating data within our own operations. Given how much time and effort it took to come up with that and to come up with an approach that made sense for us, I'm a little concerned about what's happening in our supply chain as far as how some of these things are taking place. But it's a huge challenge, and I think the standard takes the first step towards outlining what the issues are, what we need to be aware of as we go through that process, and certainly what our suppliers and what others need to be aware of as they go through that. It doesn't necessarily solve all of the problems with allocation.
Yeah, there was one over there. Thank you.
Karen Clemens with Merck. I wanted to get an idea from the panelists, and actually Linda, you specifically, what level of effort it took. So how many different facilities and entities or people were involved, and how many man-hours to pull the data together, and what was the % man-hours internal versus external in your suppliers and other parts of your supply chain?
Good. That was it. She said, "I don't know," for anyone who didn't hear. Anyone up here who does know?
A lot.
Yeah, it was a lot of. I'd never really tried to put a number on it. The process, I think, took us about 4 months' time, and we had a various number of people from different departments, supply chain and EHS, working on it, not full-time, but it requires attention, but I wouldn't say that. We had some consultant help as well. So I think it also depends on to what level of detail you want to go into, and whether or not you're, for your business needs, taking higher level proxy data or estimation is sufficient, or if you're going to go down to granular detail and getting a highly precise number. So I think it depends on the scope of your operations and the level of depth that you want to go into.
Anyone else want to volunteer their
No, although I'm going to hazard a guess by all the nodding that went on up here that none of us have tried to implement these things without the help of external consultants. So if that gives you a sense for, it's not just a question of resources in terms of person hours or anything like that, but it's also a question of expertise and know-how and the ability to manage all this data. So it's certainly the hours and the resources are large at this point in time, but there's also the need to bring in expertise from external parties, I think, for a lot of folks anyway right now.
Yeah, I think, don't know why, maybe I'm lucky, or, WLI has developed the protocol so good that make our job quite easy. With the whole process used me about like 4 to 6 months, and I have an intern full-time working on that, but he was collecting data from other representatives. So the total man-hour, I don't know how much it is, but I said that earlier, I'm lucky because we have a long-term partnership with our suppliers, and they provide us quite quality data, and we don't have to trace around and get information. That helps us quite a lot.
Sure. Thank you. Jonathan.
It was a lot of time. We did have outside help. We did use a mix of primary and secondary data and economic input-output life cycle analysis that allowed us to pinpoint priority commodities that helped us determine who we were going to outreach to. I don't know in terms of numbers of man hours. It was maybe a third of my job for the road testing process time frame. So.
And that time frame was what, again, period of months?
It was, I think, the 4 to 6 months roughly that we all went through that.
And sorry, I let you get away with just saying no. Did you want to expand on that answer at all, or? Sorry.
Ask my colleague. Do we know how many people worked on it? No, and we took one of our products had already gone through an LCA, and the other product we had not done an LCA already. And so we've got an internal LCA team of engineers that spends a lot of time thinking about these issues. So it would be hard to quantify. But we had 2 people who did it.
Thank you. Right, I think we maybe got time for just one last question if there's anyone else. Sorry?
One more.
Yeah. Okay, and I can see 2 hands up. So why don't we take the two questions very quickly in turn, and then we'll just go on. You're there and then there. Thank you.
Yes, Keith Miller with 3M, and I was just wondering how you address the issue of uncertainty. Talked about how it's very useful to use these. We were also a road tester and found that using the standard internally was great, and David, I think, had a good comment on this, but using it externally, as you talked about with consumers, et cetera, we found that in our best assessment, there was probably 40 to 50% uncertainty. So I think there's a certain risk in communicating those numbers externally, and I'm wondering how the panel addressed that.
Thank you. And then perhaps just final question there before we take the answers on that. Yep.
Greg Trimble, Walmart. So how do you address the concerns of suppliers that transparency might lead to price concession requests?
Yeah, okay, 2 very interesting questions there.
Uncertainty.
Yeah, go on, uncertainty.
Very simply, we just dealt with it in terms of estimating the range of uncertainty, like it sounds like you did, and then reporting the numbers with an accurate number of significant digits to reflect that. Might have been a shortcut, but we feel that accounts for it.
Anyone else got an answer on uncertainty? Did you do similar things?
It's similar, and particularly with us, with the use phase being such a large component of our overall life cycle emissions, there's a tremendous amount of assumptions, assumptions about how much the technology is, the fuel efficiency, how much is being driven, what's the lifetime of the vehicle. So there is a lot of uncertainty.
I think for us too, it's been about focusing on the sources of uncertainty in what we would call sort of the hotspots, right? So if there's an area that we identify as particularly important, it's really focusing on that and identifying what are the sources of uncertainty and how would those affect decision making.
Yeah. I think we handle the uncertainty by looking at the relevancy. So for those higher footprint portion, we put more effort to get the data correct. And for those like waste disposal, I know the uncertainty is pretty high, but I mean, the relevancy is pretty low, and the percentage impact to the overall result will be lower.
Again, I guess that's something that very much argues against using these kind of metrics in conversations with consumers, because the one thing probably you don't want to do is say, well, the emissions could be this or it could be that, which is 50% higher, and and certainly the level of precision that says this bag of chips is 3.5 grams is just really realistically not going to be able to go to. And then final question, Walmart, I guess, maybe has a particular interest in this one. How do you deal with honesty from suppliers and getting your suppliers to be honest, given fears about kind of commercial relationships and commercial negotiations, and how that information potentially might be used against them? Any thoughts? No.
I think it's a very relevant issue, and it is a very real issue. We have had that sort of feedback from our suppliers in the past, and there's any number of ways to deal with it. One of the things that we've tried to do is say, this is what we think your emissions or your operation looks like. Tell us if we're wrong. Just to sort of start the ball rolling and kind of have like a seed there. Another thing we've done is we've gone to the level of having an officer of the company send a letter to the supplier saying this data, this information will go to our environmental teams only. No one else in the company will see it, and so that they can have some confidence. That's not a step we can take if we're doing this thousands of times, right? So it works once or twice, but that sort of is an ongoing challenge right now.
Thank you. Sam, an issue for you?
Yeah, I think we handle it. Well, we have suppliers that provide us like different percentage of products, and we handle it by looking at the working with the major suppliers. They are able to give us more accurate information, and the price-sensitive issue mainly arise from the minor suppliers that produce us like once a year an order or two, and they are not willing to provide that information. But if we work with the main supplier, we can get the result very accurately, and we can extrapolate the data and make it representative for the whole picture.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I think in automotive there's a fair amount of, not always historically, but especially more recently, of interaction and transparency on a variety of levels, including cost data. And so we found it kind of varied a little bit from industry to industry, that we were engaging with. Some were more willing to share data, others wanted more reassurances, so that happened. And then at the industry level, from the industry questionnaire, it was developed that we used in conjunction with the CDP supply chain questionnaire. They developed a macro within an Excel spreadsheet. It's not long-term sustainable in terms of a system, but it was a way, a beginning stage, that basically erased primary data and just left allocated emissions data, and got rid of some of that data that would be of concern, of proprietary information, things like that. So that was one way of getting at some of this initial data.
Sure.
And I would just echo what everyone said. The larger suppliers seem to have more of the capability and willingness to provide data. The smaller suppliers, less so. So it's a challenge, and we're working through it.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think we've got to leave it there. Sorry, I apologize to anyone if we didn't get to your question. Hopefully might be a bit of time afterwards to discuss things privately, but I hope also you agree it's been a fantastic, fascinating conversation, a very useful exposition of the issues. And thank you very much indeed to the panelists. Thank you, David Spitzley, Sam Kwong, Jonathan Newton, Mark Scorsolini. Thank you very much indeed.